James English has fallen out with Darren G. Darren G has fallen out with James English, and then Shaun Atwood, but now Darren G has fallen back in with Shaun Atwood. Darren G and Liam Ditchy have fallen out. Darren G and Marvin Herbert have fallen out. Marvin Herbert has fallen out with living in London. Liam Ditchy's now fallen out with living in London, I believe. Sam Walker doesn't like Darren G, but Sam Walker's back in prison. Jordan McCann is probably not happy with living in London at the moment because of some of the stuff living in London has been saying, but Jordan McCann's back in prison at the moment. Yeah, so I hope that's cleared it up. Hiya, Griff here. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day and I said, have you heard about these podcast wars? And he's like, what? And I said, I know the podcast wars on YouTube. And he had no idea what I was on about. And I sort of tried explaining it to him. And I got myself very confused, really, whilst trying to explain all the various offshoots and deviations that have been taken over the last few years. So I felt, for people like him, it was important that I made this video, which I'm going to call an introduction to the podcast wars. So anybody late to the party, hopefully, and I'll try and be as accurate as I can, but I don't have all the information, only what I've watched. For people late to the party, this will be an opportunity to sort of catch up a bit, because it's like, if you start watching now, it's like watching Game of Thrones from season 4 or something, I would imagine. Not that I've ever seen it, but there's a lot has gone on. So this is my take on it. As I say, I may or may not be accurate here, but this is how I've seen it. Now, the British podcasting game, obviously if you go onto my other channel, which is called Griff's Lonely Dollar Lectures, I was doing podcasts about 4 or 5 years ago, which would just be me talking, audio only, groundbreaking stuff at the time. But the game's changed, since I left, since I quit. Now, possibly this started with True Geordie. You may or may not know him. He just made a sort of one-off video, rant into camera, because of how pissed he was off with Newcastle United football team at the time. One thing led to another, and now he's probably Britain's most successful podcaster. I haven't watched him for a while, but I have done over the years, and he's had some cracking guests. Ricky Gervais, that was a good episode. He's had all sorts of people on. He's gone from strength to strength, okay? But I think possibly off the back of that, a lot of other people have thought, hang on a minute, what's this podcast game all about? And I've tried to get in there. Now there's a lot of, reforming criminals. What you will find with a criminal fraternity, they're a very, very flexible bunch. And they're always willing to try something new. Now, I think a lot of people have thought, hang on, there may be a few quid to be had in this podcasting game. And I've jumped on it for that reason. But I think, as I say, True Geordie may have been the first big British podcaster. First one I'm aware of anyway, obviously apart from myself. But then I became aware of a guy called James English, who's actually Scottish. Started watching him a few years ago. Has some great guests, very good interviewer. Always liked a lot of his stuff. And he's always professed that he's going to be the biggest podcaster in the world. So obviously a very ambitious chap. Now also near the top of this dubious tree, you'd have somebody called Shaun Atwood. Spent time in the American penal system, and a lot of his podcasts are sort of crime based. Did a good series on Jeffrey Epstein, etc. Always looking to dig into out in paedophiles and stuff. A lot of his videos have been down that angle. Now, he's been around for quite a few years. Now, it would have been simple for them both to carry on doing their own thing and grow their own crowds and live happily ever after, but it hasn't really worked out like that. Now, a few years ago, James English had a guest called Darren G. He's a Scouser, served a long time in prison. He got out. I remember watching the first Darren G on James English, blew me away. Very engaging character, this Darren G. Very difficult story to listen to of his childhood and, descent into crime and all that. But thoroughly enjoyable. He was on James English a few times, 2 or maybe 3. First one had like 1 million views or something. But then they were looking like they were turning into buddies, and they had a bit of a falling out then. Now I think that's when Darren G must have thought, hang on, 1 million people have watched this. Maybe I should be doing this myself. At the time when Darren G and James English were still close, Darren G was slagging off what could be constituted to be James English's biggest rival for the British podcast, second in line to the True Geordie's throne, Shaun Atwood. So Darren G was giving Shaun Atwood a load of grief. Now you'll find in these podcast wars the word nonce flies around. So basically Darren G was saying that Shaun Atwood's probably a bit of a nonce. But then Darren G and James English fell out. So there's been an ongoing situation between those two. I then became aware of a guy called Marvin Herbert. Now he's a London-based reformed gangster. When I first saw him, I thought, this is one engaging character. Very full on. He started doing his own podcast then. These people started off as guests on other people's and then thought, right, I'm going to do my own. Go off and do my own podcast. Now, there's been a bit of a falling out with Darren G and Marvin Herbert, so they're not very good friends. I also became aware of a guy called Billy Moore, another Scouser, served a lot of time in Thailand, had a film made about his time in a Thailand jail. Cry Before Dawn, or something like that, I don't know, but I've downloaded his autobiography to audiobook. Read by Stephen Walters, I think his name is, a Scouse actor, which is very good. I like Billy Moore. He's one of these guys who sort of drifted out of not really got involved too much in the podcast wars. There's another guy, Decker Haggy. Now both of these podcasts are called All or Nothing. Billy Moore's All or Nothing. Decker Haggy's got the official All or Nothing podcast. I'm not sure what that's all about. Decker Haggy's recently had some sort of run-ins with trolls. Trolls and nonces, those are words you'll hear a lot in this game. Decker Haggy's got a big expose video coming out soon, where he says he's been trolled for the last couple of years, people trying to ruin his life. He's had some good stuff as well, but recently he's been a bit wrapped up in all this podcast wars sort of stuff. Now, there's another guy who I first saw on Marvin Herbert, living in London, Daniel Lazar. He's a strange character, that lad. He's Camden based. Now, I saw him on Marvin Herbert's podcast. Didn't really say a lot, but he started his own channel. But recently, he's been looking, I don't know what his game is really. He's calling a lot of people out, really. He's meddling a bit, to be honest. I used to find him quite entertaining, but recently he's got a bit obsessed with the podcast wars element to his content, He was quite friendly once with another Scouser called Liam Ditchy. Now, he was a guest on somewhere. I think he was on Marvin Herbert once, sort of slagging off Darren G. Apparently he was saying he used to work for Darren G when they were active, but Darren G has denied this. Yeah, so Liam Ditchy, he was sort of friendly with living in London, I believe, Lazar, but now they've fallen out. Living in London has also been posting content about a guy called Jordan McCann. Now, he's supposed to be Salford based. He's actually into his music, and he was on Charlie Sloth's, what's that thing called now, Charlie Sloth? Fire in the Booth, I think, if you have a look on that, Jordan McCann. Millions of views on that. Yeah, another interesting character. Some of his music is pretty good, actually. But living in London has been saying, because Jordan McCann's been recalled to prison. Living in London has said that stuff's gone on in prison where McCann has been hurt by people. Now, this may or may not be true. Yeah. Also, then you got a guy called Sam Walker, another Scouser. He's been recalled to prison as well. He's back in prison. He's not friends with Darren G either. And then there's another guy then called the real Danny G. Now, Darren G, the Scouser, has got a brother called Danny G who's still in prison. Supposed to be quite a dangerous guy. But the real Danny G, he's a different guy. He's from Birmingham. He's worth watching. Mental guy. Been making content for quite a few years. Was recently on Shaun Atwood. But I don't think he's not looking to get involved in these podcast wars. I think a few years ago maybe he would have. But I think he's a bit older and wiser now. So he's just concentrating on his own sort of content. And there's a guy who's come on the scene fairly recently, a guy called Paul. He channels under the name Fighting Trolls. Now, a Welsh guy. He seems sort of harmless enough. He did a lot of live streams. I used to watch them sometimes. But recently he's sort of getting pulled into the podcast wars because now he doesn't like Darren G now. Apparently he's offered to go up and have a fight with him. And apparently Sam Walker has gone looking for Darren G for a fight. Apparently Darren G is willing to fight anybody. Darren G and Shaun Atwood are now mates. Darren G was slagging off Shaun Atwood a lot, as I mentioned earlier, but apparently James English was convincing Darren G that Shaun Atwood had some dubious charges. Darren G believed it. He now realises that he was potentially duped. He's now friends with Attwood. I'm not 100% sure about Attwood. Some good content over the years, but not convinced he's got Darren G's best interests at heart. I like Darren G, actually. I've given him the odd donation when I listened to his lives. Not much, like, £2 here and there. But I like him, but he's fucking obviously mad, like the rest of them. So basically James English has fallen out with Darren G. Darren G has fallen out with James English and then Shaun Atwood, but now Darren G has fallen back in with Shaun Atwood. Darren G and Liam Ditchy have fallen out. Darren G and Marvin Herbert have fallen out. Marvin Herbert has fallen out with Living in London. They had a little scuffle, which is quite funny if you look for the Marvin Herbert Living in London fight, when they were having a fight and both filming each other at the same time. That was quite amusing. Liam Ditchy's now fallen out with Living in London, I believe. Sam Walker doesn't like Darren G, but Sam Walker's back in prison. Jordan McCann is probably not happy with Living in London at the moment because of some of the stuff Living in London has been saying, but Jordan McCann's back in prison at the moment. Billy Moore just cracks on and does his stuff, does his podcasts, and as does the real Danny G. He just tends to do his stuff, keeps himself out of the drama, really. There's also a guy called Scotty G who burst on the scene like Mika Richards briefly. He was then saying that Decca Heggie was a nonce. Decca Heggie threatened to batter him. Scotty G's gone off the scene, but I think he may be back in prison. Yeah, so I hope that's cleared it up. So just look out for these lads, you know, James English. As I say, good podcasts. A lot of them come out on a Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. There's some good guests. I listened to him for years. Shaun Atwood I listened to on and off for years. Darren G, I like listening to his stuff. I used to like listening to Marvin Herbert, but he tends to talk a bit too much about himself. But, you know, wouldn't want to mess with him. Living in London, I used to enjoy. He was quite fun. Now he's gone a bit gossipy. Liam Ditchy, never went too deeply into him. He came on the scene and sort of, I think, concentrates on getting people jobs now, apparently. Billy Moore, I like his podcast. And, and I like his book as well. So he's worth listening to. Dagger Haggy, former bare knuckle sort of boxer. Former governor, I believe. He's had a lot of run-ins lately. Now, there's talk that I've heard that James English has possibly got the backing of some proper bad boys. And maybe, as he's professed in the past that he wants to be the biggest podcaster in the world, maybe a lot of this is down to English want to take out all the opposition. That's possibly a source of where all this has started, or a lot of it anyway. Maybe not, as I say, I don't know. Shaun Atwood's currently demanding an apology from James English, otherwise he's going to take him to court, but I don't think that's forthcoming. Darren G is just, as I say, he's been doing stuff with Atwood lately. Marvin Herbert's doing his thing. But the reason I wanted to make this video is to sort of give like an introduction to these podcast wars. I haven't explained it very well, but it's very, very complicated and I don't know half the information. But that's what I've managed to glean from about 2.5, 3 years on YouTube. So it'll save you the bother. Somebody said the other day, yeah, these podcast wars, it's like a soap opera for low IQ blokes, which I proudly consider myself one of them. So yeah, it is a bit of a soap opera. It is a bit like EastEnders. I sometimes go on YouTube and think, all the things I could be watching, yeah, ancient Egyptian history or classic 70s football matches, motivational speeches, and but I always tend to find myself drifting towards grown men arguing on YouTube and calling each other nonsense. Probably says as much about me as it does about them, and potentially about you. So yeah, if you manage to listen to all of that, take my hat off to you, and I'll possibly keep you updated on any future developments. Thanks, guys.